The smoke rose thick and black from the boarding house kitchen on that September morning in 1876, and Tabitha Preston knew she had ruined everything before anyone else smelled it. She pulled the cast-iron pan from the wood stove, staring in horror at the charred remains of what was supposed to be fresh bread for the morning meal. The golden loaves she had envisioned had transformed into blackened lumps that looked more like chunks of coal than anything edible. Her hands trembled as she set the pan on the wooden counter, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. Georgetown, Colorado had been her home for only 3 weeks, and already she was proving herself incompetent in the one job she had managed to secure. Mrs. Whitmore ran a respectable boarding house on the edge of town, catering to miners, trappers, and the occasional businessman passing through on their way to the silver mines that dotted the Rocky Mountains surrounding the settlement. The older woman had taken a chance on Tabitha, despite her obvious lack of experience, and this was how she repaid that kindness. The dining room beyond the kitchen door had already filled with the usual morning crowd. Tabitha could hear their voices, the scrape of chairs against wooden floors, the clatter of tin cups being set on tables. They were waiting for breakfast, and she had nothing to serve them except burned bread and her own shame. "What in the name of all that is holy have you done?" Mrs. Whitmore's sharp voice cut through Tabitha's spiraling thoughts. The older woman stood in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in its customary severe bun, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. She marched over to inspect the damage, shaking her head with each step. "Girl, I told you to watch that oven. Told you the damper needed adjusting every 15 minutes. Did you listen?" "No, of course not." "I am so sorry," Tabitha whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I had time. I was preparing the eggs and the bacon, and I just forgot to check, and I'm so sorry." Mrs. Whitmore sighed heavily, the sound carrying years of dealing with incompetent help. "Sorry does not feed hungry men, Miss Preston. Those are working men out there. They need proper food to start their day, not apologies." She picked up one of the blackened loaves, examining it as though it were evidence in a trial. "This is beyond salvaging. I suppose we will have to make do with extra bacon and eggs, though how I am supposed to stretch what we have to feed 15 men, I do not know." The kitchen door swung open again, and Martha Collins, another girl who worked at the boarding house, stuck her head in. Her eyes widened at the sight of the burned bread. "Oh my. They are getting restless out there, Mrs. Whitmore, asking when breakfast will be ready." "Tell them 5 more minutes," Mrs. Whitmore ordered, "and do not mention this disaster." But Martha's whisper to someone in the dining room carried clearly back to the kitchen, and within moments, Tabitha heard the comments. "Burned the bread? What kind of cook cannot manage simple bread?" "Mrs. Whitmore needs to find better help. My wife could bake bread in her sleep and it would never come out like that. Probably some city girl who does not know one end of a stove from the other." The criticism stung worse than any physical blow. Tabitha blinked rapidly, determined not to cry in front of Mrs. Whitmore. She was 20 years old, alone in the world since her father's death 6 months prior, and trying desperately to make her own way. She had grown up in Denver, the daughter of a schoolteacher who had died suddenly of pneumonia, leaving her with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and the need to find work wherever she could. Georgetown had seemed like a good opportunity when she had seen Mrs. Whitmore's advertisement in the newspaper seeking kitchen help. Now it felt like just another place where she did not belong. "Get to work on those eggs," Mrs. Whitmore instructed, her tone slightly softer. "And Miss Preston, try to focus on the task at hand. I know you are capable of better than this." Tabitha nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned to the basket of eggs, cracking them into a large bowl with mechanical precision. Behind her, Mrs. Whitmore gathered the burned loaves, and Tabitha assumed she would throw them to the pigs they kept out back. Instead, the older woman set them aside on a separate plate and covered them with a cloth. The morning continued in a blur of activity. Tabitha scrambled eggs, fried bacon until it was crispy, and helped Martha serve the grumbling boarders. She kept her eyes down, not wanting to see their disappointed or mocking faces. The dining room slowly emptied as the men finished their meals and headed off to their various jobs. Some left coins on the table, others had weekly arrangements with Mrs. Whitmore. Tabitha cleared plates and tried to make herself invisible. She was scrubbing the last of the dishes when the kitchen door opened with such force it banged against the wall. Tabitha jumped, nearly dropping the plate in her hands. She turned to see the largest man she had ever encountered filling the doorway. He had to duck slightly to enter, his broad shoulders nearly spanning the width of the doorframe. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, partially tied back with a leather cord but with several strands escaping to frame a face that was all hard angles and weathered tan skin. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his eyes were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy wool shirt that strained across a chest so muscled it looked like it had been carved from the very granite of the Rockies. His hands were massive, scarred from what looked like years of hard living. "Help you?" Tabitha managed to squeak out, her heart hammering in her chest. She was not afraid exactly, but the sheer presence of this man overwhelmed the small kitchen. He did not answer immediately. Instead, those gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Heard you had some bread. Burned bread." Tabitha felt her cheeks flush hot with embarrassment. "That was my mistake, sir. We do not have any proper bread this morning, but if you are hungry, I can make you eggs and bacon." "Do not want eggs and bacon." He stepped further into the kitchen, and Tabitha was struck again by just how massive he was. She was not a small woman herself, standing nearly 5.5 feet tall, but she barely came up to his shoulder. "Want the burned bread?" "I'm sorry, what?" Tabitha was certain she had misheard. "The burned bread," he repeated patiently. "Where is it?" Tabitha glanced around the kitchen, confused. "I believe Mrs. Whitmore was going to dispose of it. Sir, it is not fit for eating. I burned it quite badly. It is my fault, and I apologize, but truly, it is inedible. Let me be the judge of that." He crossed his arms over that broad chest, clearly not planning to leave until he got what he wanted. Flustered, Tabitha went to the back counter where she found the covered plate. Mrs. Whitmore must have forgotten about it in the morning rush. She brought it back to the large man, pulling off the cloth to reveal the blackened loaves. They looked even worse now, cold and hard as rocks. "There," she said weakly. "But honestly, sir, I cannot in good conscience serve you this. Please, let me make you something else." He reached out and took one of the loaves, his large hand making it look almost normal-sized. He broke off a piece, and Tabitha winced at the sound of it cracking. Charcoal flaked off onto the floor. Without hesitation, he popped the piece into his mouth and began to chew. Tabitha watched in horrified fascination as he ate, his expression thoughtful. She waited for him to spit it out, to confirm what she already knew about her terrible cooking. Instead, he swallowed and took another piece. "You do not have to do that," Tabitha said quickly. "Really, sir, I know it is awful." "It is burned," he agreed, taking another bite. "But the inside is not so bad. Bread is bread. I have eaten worse." "Where could you possibly have eaten worse?" The question escaped before Tabitha could stop herself. She clapped a hand over her mouth, horrified by her own rudeness, but the corner of his mouth twitched under that thick beard, almost like he was amused. "Spent a winter in the mountains 5 years back. Got snowed in early. Ate tree bark and boiled leather for 3 months. This is better than tree bark." Tabitha did not know what to say to that. She watched as he continued eating the burned bread, making his way through the first loaf. He did not seem to be forcing it down or suffering through it. He ate methodically, steadily, as though it were perfectly normal food. "What is your name?" he asked between bites. "Tabitha Preston," she answered automatically. "I work here in the kitchen, usually. Assuming Mrs. Whitmore does not dismiss me after this morning's disaster." "Disaster," he repeated, shaking his head. "This is not a disaster. Disaster is an avalanche. Disaster is a grizzly in your camp. This is just bread that got left too long in the oven." He finished the first loaf and reached for the second. "You have more?" Tabitha stared at him. "More burned bread?" "No, sir. That was the full batch I ruined." "Pity." He started on the second loaf. "Name is Ryder Dalton. I have a cabin about 8 miles up in the mountains. Trap mostly. Come down every few weeks for supplies." "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Dalton," Tabitha said, still bewildered by this entire interaction. The men at breakfast had mocked her burned bread. This mountain man was eating it like it was a feast. "Ryder," he corrected. "No need for formalities. You do all the cooking here?" "I help Mrs. Whitmore," Tabitha explained. "Or I try to. As you can see, I'm not very skilled. I grew up in Denver. My father was a school teacher. We did not have much money, but we always bought our bread from the baker. I never learned to make it properly myself until I came here." Ryder nodded slowly, still eating. Everyone has to learn sometime. You will get better." His matter-of-fact confidence in her abilities surprised Tabitha. This stranger believed she could improve when she herself was not so certain. "You're very kind to say so, but the men at breakfast would disagree. They made it quite clear that I am incompetent." "Those men?" Ryder's expression hardened slightly. "They the ones I saw leaving as I came up?" "Some of them, yes." "Town men," he said, as if that explained everything. "Got soft living. Expect everything perfect all the time. Life is not perfect. Food is not always perfect. But you eat what you have and be grateful for it." Tabitha found herself relaxing slightly. There was something comforting about his practical philosophy. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that this morning." Ryder finished the second loaf and brushed the crumbs from his hands. "How much do I owe you for the bread?" "Nothing," Tabitha said quickly. "I cannot charge you for burned food. Please consider it my apology for wasting ingredients." "Was not wasted if I ate it," he pointed out. He reached into a pocket and pulled out some coins, setting them on the counter. "For the bread and your time." "Really, Mr. Dalton, Ryder, that is not necessary." But he was already moving toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "You have a talent for something, Tabitha Preston. Maybe it is not bread yet, but everyone has something they are good at. You will find yours." Then he was gone, ducking back through the doorway and disappearing. Tabitha stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the coins he had left. They were more than enough to pay for the wasted flour and yeast. She picked them up slowly, turning them over in her palm, and felt the first genuine smile of the day cross her face. Mrs. Whitmore entered a moment later, eyeing the empty plate on the counter with surprise. "Where did the burned bread go? I was going to give it to the pigs." "A man ate it," Tabitha said. "A very large mountain man named Ryder Dalton. He ate both loaves and paid me for them." Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Ryder Dalton was here? That is unusual. He rarely comes into town proper, usually just stops at the general store for supplies and heads back up to his cabin." "He said he heard about the burned bread and wanted to try it," Tabitha explained, still somewhat dazed by the entire encounter. "Wanted to try burned bread," Mrs. Whitmore repeated slowly. "Well, that is the strangest thing I have heard in quite some time. Though I suppose nothing about Ryder Dalton is conventional. He has been up in those mountains for near 7 years now. Keeps to himself mostly. Good man from what I hear. Honest, fair in his dealings, but private." Tabitha tucked the coins into her apron pocket, feeling their comforting weight. "He was very kind about my mistake." "That sounds like Ryder," Mrs. Whitmore said. She gave Tabitha a long look, her expression softening. "Miss Preston, I am not going to dismiss you. Everyone makes mistakes when they are learning, but you need to be more careful. Pay attention to what you are doing. Can you promise me that?" Relief flooded through Tabitha so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Yes, madam, I promise. I will do better. I will be more careful." "Good. Now, we have lunch to prepare in a few hours, and I expect you to redeem yourself. Simple stew should be safe enough. Even you cannot burn water." Tabitha winced, but nodded. She would prove herself. She had to. This job was all that stood between her and complete destitution. The rest of the day passed without incident. Tabitha focused entirely on her tasks, triple-checking everything she did. The stew for lunch turned out well, thick with beef and vegetables. The boarders ate without complaint, which Tabitha took as a victory. For dinner, she helped prepare roasted chicken and potatoes, and again, everything went smoothly. By the time she climbed the stairs to her small attic room that night, Tabitha was exhausted. But as she lay in her narrow bed, staring at the sloped ceiling, her thoughts kept returning to the mountain man with the storm-gray eyes who had eaten her burned bread without complaint, without mockery, who had looked at her like she was a person capable of learning and growing, not just a foolish girl who could not manage a simple task. She fell asleep with a small smile on her face, not knowing that Ryder Dalton was lying in his own bed 8 miles away in the mountains, thinking about a woman with auburn hair and hazel eyes who had looked so defeated over something as simple as burned bread. The next 3 weeks passed quickly for Tabitha. She threw herself into learning everything she could about cooking. Mrs. Whitmore proved to be a patient if exacting teacher, and gradually Tabitha's skills improved. She learned to judge the temperature of the oven by holding her hand inside for a count of 10. She learned which herbs complemented which meats. She learned to knead bread dough until it was smooth and elastic, and how to tell when it had risen enough. She did not burn anything else, though she came close a few times. But each near disaster taught her something new, and slowly her confidence grew. Ryder Dalton did not return to the boarding house. Tabitha told herself she was not disappointed. He was just a passing stranger who had shown her kindness. She had no reason to expect to see him again. Georgetown was not a large town, but it was big enough that their paths might never cross. Still, she found herself looking up every time the kitchen door opened, hoping to see that massive frame filling the doorway. October arrived with a cold snap that sent temperatures plummeting and coated the mountain peaks with fresh snow. The leaves on the aspen trees turned brilliant gold, creating a stunning contrast against the dark evergreens and gray stone of the Rockies. Tabitha had never seen anything quite like it in Denver. The beauty of this mountain town took her breath away on the rare occasions when she had time to stop and appreciate it. It was a Saturday morning, and the boarding house was quieter than usual. Several of the regular boarders had taken jobs at a mine further up the valley and would not return until Sunday evening. Mrs. Whitmore had given Tabitha a list of supplies to purchase from the general store, a task that filled her with both excitement and nervousness. It was her first time being trusted to handle the shopping alone. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Georgetown was bustling despite the early hour. Wagons rolled down the main street, kicking up dust. Men shouted greetings to each other. Somewhere a dog barked. The smell of wood smoke hung heavy in the air as every building worked to ward off the autumn chill. The general store sat at the corner of Main Street and 6th, a sturdy two-story building with a false front that made it look even larger. Tabitha pushed open the door, and a bell jingled overhead. The interior was dim compared to the bright morning outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. Mr. Fletcher, the proprietor, looked up from behind his counter and smiled. "Miss Preston, good morning. What can I do for you today?" "Good morning, Mr. Fletcher. Mrs. Whitmore sent me with a list." Tabitha pulled the folded paper from her pocket and handed it over. Mr. Fletcher examined it, nodding to himself. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans should not be a problem. Give me a few minutes to gather everything. Feel free to look around. Tabitha wandered the narrow aisles, marveling at the variety of goods crammed into the space. Bolts of fabric sat next to tools. Canned goods shared shelves with ammunition. Everything a person might need to survive in the mountains seemed to be represented here. She was examining a display of ribbons, thinking how pretty they were, even though she had no reason to buy any, when the bell over the door jangled again. She glanced up out of habit and felt her heart give an unexpected lurch. Ryder Dalton stood just inside the doorway, looking even larger than she remembered. He carried a stack of furs over one shoulder, beaver and marten and what looked like fox. His buckskin clothes were well worn but clean, and his long hair was tied back neatly. His gray eyes scanned the store and locked on her immediately. "Miss Preston," he said, inclining his head in greeting. "Mr. Dalton," Tabitha replied, pleased that her voice came out steady. "I mean, Ryder, it's good to see you again." "Good to see you too." He moved to the counter and set down his bundle of furs. "Morning, Fletcher. Got pelts for you." Mr. Fletcher emerged from the back room, his arms full of Tabitha's supplies. His face brightened when he saw Ryder. "Dalton, excellent. Let me just finish with Miss Preston here, and I will give you my full attention." He tallied up Tabitha's purchases, and she paid with the money Mrs. Whitmore had given her. As Mr. Fletcher wrapped everything in brown paper, Ryder stood nearby, close enough that Tabitha could feel the warmth radiating from his large body. She snuck glances at him from the corner of her eye, taking in details she had missed during their first meeting. The way his hands, though scarred and rough, moved with surprising gentleness. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the silver streak in his beard that suggested he was older than she had initially thought, though she still could not guess his age. Mid-30s, perhaps. "How has the cooking been going?" Ryder asked suddenly, and Tabitha realized he had caught her looking at him. Her cheeks warmed, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Much better, thank you. I've not burned anything since that morning you visited. Well, I did scorch some rice once, but that does not really count. The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. Progress. I suppose so. She hesitated, then added, Thank you again for what you did that day. Eating that terrible bread. You did not have to do that. Was not terrible, he said. Just burned. Told you I have eaten much worse. Mr. Fletcher finished wrapping Tabitha's purchases and slid the bundle across the counter. There you are, Miss Preston. Tell Mrs. Whitmore I will have those special spices she wanted next week when the supply wagon comes through. I will. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Tabitha gathered up her package, surprised by how heavy it was. She had not realized flour could weigh quite so much. She made it 3 steps toward the door before the weight shifted awkwardly, and she had to stop and readjust her grip. Behind her she heard Ryder's deep voice. Let me help. Before she could protest, he was there, gently taking the package from her arms as though it weighed nothing at all. Where are you headed? Back to the boarding house, Tabitha said. But you really do not need to carry that. I can manage. I know you can, Ryder said. But I'm going that direction anyway. Might as well make myself useful. He held the door open for her, and Tabitha had no choice but to accept his help gracefully. They walked down the wooden sidewalk together, Ryder shortening his long stride to match her pace. People they passed stared openly, and Tabitha knew what they were seeing, the rough mountain man and the boarding house girl, probably already making up stories about them. Does it bother you? She asked impulsively. The way people look at you? Ryder glanced at her, then at the curious onlookers. Used to, not anymore. People will always judge what they do not understand. I do not fit into their idea of civilized, so they stare. Does not hurt me any. I suppose you are right. Tabitha thought about the comments the boarders had made about her burned bread, how their words had stung, how she had let their opinions matter so much. It bothers me, though, when people judge me. That is because you are still trying to fit in, Ryder observed. Once you stop caring about fitting in and just focus on being who you are, their opinions lose their power. Tabitha considered that. Is that why you live up in the mountains alone? To avoid judgment? Partly, he admitted. Mostly because I like the quiet. Like being able to breathe without feeling crowded. Town is all right for short visits, but I could never live here full time. Too many people, too much noise. They reached the boarding house, and Ryder followed her around to the back entrance that led directly into the kitchen. Mrs. Whitmore was there, rolling out pie dough. Her eyes widened when she saw who was with Tabitha. Mr. Dalton, she said, surprised. This is unexpected. Mrs. Whitmore, Ryder set the package down on the counter. Just helping Miss Preston with her supplies. That is very kind of you. Mrs. Whitmore wiped her floury hands on her apron, studying him with open curiosity. We do not see you in town often. Needed to trade pelts, Ryder explained. Winter is coming. Wanted to stock up on supplies before the heavy snows hit. Wise thinking. Mrs. Whitmore glanced between him and Tabitha, and something calculating entered her expression. Have you had breakfast, Mr. Dalton? I imagine you have been up since before dawn. The least we can do is offer you a meal in thanks for your help. That is not necessary, Ryder said. I insist, Mrs. Whitmore said firmly. Tabitha, fix Mr. Dalton a proper breakfast, eggs, bacon, and bread. Let us show him that your baking has improved. Tabitha felt a flutter of panic. Having Ryder eat burned bread she had already discarded was one thing. Deliberately cooking for him was entirely different. What if she messed it up? What if she disappointed him? But Ryder was already settling onto one of the kitchen stools, clearly having decided not to argue with Mrs. Whitmore. The older woman gave Tabitha an encouraging nod and went back to her pie dough. Tabitha took a deep breath and got to work. She had done this dozens of times now. She knew how to make breakfast. She could do this. She heated the cast iron skillet, adding a pat of butter that sizzled and melted. She cracked eggs carefully, making sure no shells fell in. She added thick slices of bacon that had been cured by Mrs. Whitmore herself. From the pantry, she retrieved a loaf of bread she had baked the previous evening. It had turned out well, golden and even, and she felt a surge of pride as she sliced it. Ryder watched her work in silence. Tabitha found his presence both comforting and unnerving. She was hyper-aware of every movement she made, every sound in the kitchen, but his quiet attention did not feel critical. Instead, it felt like genuine interest. "You look more confident," he observed, "than that first morning." "I feel more confident," Tabitha admitted. "Mrs. Whitmore has been very patient with me. I have learned so much these past weeks." She flipped the eggs carefully. "Though I still have a long way to go before I could call myself a proper cook." "Everyone starts somewhere," Ryder said. "I remember the first animal I tried to skin, made a mess of it, wasted half the meat and ruined the pelt. My pa was not pleased, but he showed me how to do it right, and I practiced until I got better." "You learned trapping from your father?" Tabitha asked, plating his food. She set it in front of him along with the bread and a jar of preserves. "Among other things." Ryder picked up his fork, examining the meal. "He was a mountain man, too. Spent his whole life up in the high country. I grew up in a cabin not far from where I live now. My ma died when I was young. After that, it was just Pa and me until I was grown." "Is your father still alive?" Tabitha asked, then immediately wished she could take back the question when she saw Ryder's expression shudder. "No. He died about 8 years ago. Got caught in a flash flood while checking his trap lines." Ryder took a bite of eggs, chewing thoughtfully. "After that, I moved into his cabin. Been there ever since." "I'm so sorry," Tabitha said softly. "I lost my father this past spring. I know how hard it is." Ryder looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw understanding in those gray eyes. "It gets easier," he said. "Never goes away completely, but it gets easier to carry." They sat in companionable silence for a while. Ryder ate steadily, seeming to genuinely enjoy the food. When he got to the bread, he slathered it with preserves and took a large bite. He chewed, swallowed, and then looked at Tabitha with approval. "Much better than the burned batch," he said, "though I would have eaten it either way." Tabitha laughed, surprised by the sound. "You are very easy to please, Ryder Dalton." "I know what I like," he countered. He finished the bread and pushed his empty plate away. "Thank you for the meal. That was good." "You are welcome." Tabitha felt warmth bloom in her chest at his praise. It meant more coming from him than it would have from anyone else, though she could not quite say why. Ryder stood, and once again Tabitha was struck by his sheer size. He made the kitchen feel small. "I should get going. Still have supplies to purchase. Want to be back up the mountain before dark." "Of course." Tabitha walked him to the door. "Thank you again for carrying the supplies and for being kind." He paused in the doorway, looking down at her. Up close, she could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes, like storm clouds breaking to reveal sky. "You are going to be just fine, Tabitha Preston. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Then he was gone, striding away with that easy, ground-eating gait. Tabitha watched until he disappeared around the corner of the building, then turned to find Mrs. Whitmore watching her with a knowing smile. "That is an interesting man," the older woman said. "Yes," Tabitha agreed. "Yes, he is." Over the following weeks, Georgetown settled into the rhythm of early winter. Snow fell with increasing frequency, dusting the town in white and turning the surrounding peaks into a scene from a Christmas card. The boarding house stayed busy with miners and workers seeking shelter from the cold. Tabitha's days fell into a comfortable routine of cooking, cleaning, and slowly building her skills and confidence. She thought about Ryder more often than she cared to admit. At odd moments, she would find herself wondering what he was doing up in his mountain cabin. Was he warm enough? Did he have plenty of food stored for the winter? Did he ever get lonely all by himself? She told herself she was being foolish. She had met the man exactly 3 times. She had no claim on him, no reason to concern herself with his welfare. Yet she could not stop the way her mind wandered to him during quiet moments. November brought the first major snowstorm. It hit on a Thursday evening, starting with a few innocent flakes and building within hours into a howling blizzard. Wind rattled the windows of the boarding house. Snow piled up against the doors. By Friday morning, Georgetown was buried under nearly 2 feet of fresh powder. Tabitha stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the white wilderness that had overtaken the town overnight. The mountains in the distance were completely obscured by falling snow. She thought of Ryder in his cabin 8 miles up, and a knot of worry formed in her stomach. "He will be fine," Mrs. Whitmore said, coming to stand beside her. The older woman seemed to read her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. Men like Ryder Dalton know how to survive winter in the mountains. He has done it for years. This storm will not trouble him." "I know," Tabitha said, "but it must be so lonely up there, especially in weather like this." Mrs. Whitmore gave her a long, measuring look. "You have taken quite an interest in our local mountain man." "I am just concerned," Tabitha protested, "as anyone would be." Mrs. Whitmore said, clearly not believing her. "Well, your concern is noted, but I assure you Ryder can take care of himself. Now, we have hungry boarders who need breakfast. Stop mooning over impossible men and get to work." Tabitha felt her cheeks flame, but she did as she was told. Mrs. Whitmore was right. She was being ridiculous. Ryder Dalton was a self-sufficient mountain man who had survived for years in the wilderness. He did not need her worrying about him, but that did not stop her from glancing out the window every few minutes, hoping against hope that she might see his familiar large frame trudging through the snow. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally cleared on Sunday afternoon, Georgetown emerged into a world transformed. Snow covered everything, pristine and beautiful and treacherous. The townspeople set about digging out, shoveling paths between buildings, checking on neighbors, taking stock of damages. Tabitha was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Martha burst through the door, her face flushed with cold and excitement. "You have to come see," she said breathlessly. "There is a man outside. He's asking for you." Tabitha's heart leaped into her throat. "A man? What man?" "That giant trapper, the one who was here a few weeks ago. He is standing in the snow like it is nothing, asking if you are here." Tabitha did not remember making the decision to move. One moment she was at the counter chopping vegetables. The next she was running through the dining room, past the surprised boarders, out the front door and down the steps. Ryder stood in the street, exactly as Martha had described. He was covered in snow from head to foot, his hair and beard crusted with ice. He carried a large pack on his back and had snowshoes strapped to his boots. His cheeks were red from the cold, but his gray eyes were clear and focused. On Tabitha. "You came all the way down in the storm," Tabitha demanded, not bothering with greetings. She was furious suddenly, terrified suddenly, overwhelmed by emotions she did not fully understand. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? You could have gotten lost. You could have frozen to death. What were you thinking?" Ryder blinked, clearly surprised by her outburst. "I was thinking I needed to make sure Georgetown had enough supplies to weather the storm. I have extra dried meat and preserved vegetables I could trade." "The town has supplies," Tabitha said. "We are fine. You did not need to risk your life." "I did not risk my life," Ryder said calmly. "I know these mountains like I know my own hands. I have walked this path in worse storms than this. I was never in danger." "You do not know that," Tabitha shot back. "Anything could have happened. A tree could have fallen. You could have stumbled into a snowdrift. You could have—" Her voice broke, and she realized to her horror that she was crying. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. Ryder's expression softened. He dropped his pack in the snow and stepped closer, his large hands coming up to rest gently on her shoulders. "Hey," he said, his voice low and soothing. "I'm all right. I'm here. I'm fine." "I was so worried," Tabitha whispered. "When the storm hit, all I could think about was you up there alone. What if something happened? What if you needed help? No one would know. No one could reach you." "Tabitha." The way he said her name, soft and careful, like she was something precious, made her look up at him. "Why were you worried about me?" She stared into those storm-gray eyes and knew she could not lie. Not to him, not about this. "Because I care about you. I know I barely know you. I know I have no right. But I do. I care about you." Ryder's hands tightened on her shoulders, and something blazed to life in his expression. Something warm and fierce and hopeful. "You have every right," he said. "Because I care about you too. Have since that morning I found you crying over burned bread, could not stop thinking about you. That's the real reason I came down during the storm, not for the town, for you, to make sure you were safe." "Oh," Tabitha breathed, and then Ryder was pulling her closer, wrapping his massive arms around her, and she was pressing her face against his chest and breathing in the scent of leather and pine and cold mountain air. He held her like she was the most important thing in the world, and Tabitha felt something in her chest crack open, releasing feelings she'd been trying to suppress for weeks. "I do not understand this," she mumbled against his shirt. "How can I feel so much for someone I barely know?" Sometimes that's just how it happens, Ryder said. His breath stirred her hair. My pa always said when you know, you know. Never understood what he meant until now. Tabitha pulled back just enough to look up at him. What are we doing? Something reckless, probably, Ryder admitted. But I've spent 7 years alone in those mountains, 7 years telling myself I was better off without anyone else, without complications. Then you walked into my life looking heartbroken over some burned bread, and I realized I was lying to myself. I do not want to be alone anymore, not if there is a chance I could be with you. I live in town, Tabitha pointed out. You live on a mountain. How would this even work? We will figure it out, Ryder said with a confidence that made her want to believe him. If you want to try. Do you want to try? Tabitha thought about the lonely months after her father's death, the feeling of being adrift with no anchor, no home, no one who truly cared about her well-being. Then she thought about Ryder's kindness, his steadiness, the way he made her feel seen and valued, the way her heart had lifted every time she thought of him. Yes, she said, I want to try. Ryder's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger and boyish despite his beard and weathered features. Good. That is good. He seemed at a loss for words, which Tabitha found endearing. This strong, capable man was nervous around her. You should come inside, she said. You must be freezing. Let me fix you something warm to eat. I would like that. They walked back to the boarding house together, and Tabitha was acutely aware of the eyes watching them from every window. Georgetown was a small town, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Tabitha Preston and Ryder Dalton had embraced in the street like long-lost lovers. Strangely, Tabitha found she did not care. Mrs. Whitmore took one look at them when they entered the kitchen and nodded as though confirming something she had known all along. Mr. Dalton, you look half frozen. Sit down and warm yourself. Tabitha, make the man some coffee and whatever else he needs. I will finish the dinner preparations. Tabitha guided Ryder to the stool by the fire, then busied herself making coffee and heating up leftover stew. Her hands were shaking slightly, whether from cold or emotion or the aftermath of adrenaline, she was not sure. Ryder watched her work, just as he had weeks before, but now there was a new awareness between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that changed everything. How long can you stay in town? Tabitha asked as she handed him a steaming mug of coffee. A few days, maybe, Ryder said, until the weather clears enough to travel safely. I have a room at the hotel down the street. Figure I will stock up on supplies while I'm here. Might be snowed in for weeks once I get back up the mountain. Weeks, Tabitha repeated. The thought of him being so isolated for so long made her chest tighten again. Will you be all right up there alone for that long? I always have been before, Ryder said, but I will admit, it sounds less appealing now than it used to. He set down his coffee and reached for her hand. His fingers were rough and calloused against her skin, but his touch was gentle. Tabitha, I need you to understand something. My life is not easy. I live rough. I do not have the comforts of town. If we do this, if we try to make something work between us, there are going to be challenges. I know, Tabitha said, but I'm not afraid of challenges. I left Denver with nothing but a trunk of clothes and came to this mountain town alone. I taught myself to cook, even though I burned everything at first. I have survived the worst year of my life. I'm stronger than I look. Ryder's expression warmed with admiration. I believe you are. He squeezed her hand gently. So here's what I propose. I will come down to town once a week through the winter. More often if the weather allows. We will spend time together, get to know each other properly. And when spring comes, if you still want this, we will figure out a more permanent arrangement. That sounds reasonable, Tabitha agreed. Then, more shyly, what kind of permanent arrangement did you have in mind? The kind where you are my wife, Ryder said bluntly. If that is what you want. I know it is fast. I know most people would say we are rushing. But I'm 34 years old, Tabitha. I know what I want. And I want you. Tabitha's breath caught. She was 20 years old, and no man had ever proposed to her. No man had ever looked at her the way Ryder was looking at her now, like she was sunlight after a long winter. I want you too, she whispered, but I think your plan is wise. We should take the winter to be certain. Agreed. They sealed the bargain with another squeeze of hands, and Tabitha felt a thrill of anticipation for the future. For the first time since her father's death, she had something to look forward to, someone to care about who cared about her in return. Ryder stayed in Georgetown for 4 days. He spent his daylight hours trading pelts, purchasing supplies, and taking care of business. His evenings belonged to Tabitha. They took long walks through the snowy streets, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of his life in the mountains, the wildlife he encountered, the changing seasons, the solitude that had once been peaceful but now felt lonely. She told him about growing up in Denver, her father's work as a teacher, her love of reading, her dreams of someday having a real home again. They discovered they both loved cold mornings and hated hot summer days. They both preferred coffee to tea. They both believed in honest work and fair dealing. They argued playfully about whether the mountains or the city was superior, neither willing to fully concede the point. Ryder kissed her on the 3rd evening, standing in the shadow of the boarding house while snow fell softly around them. His lips were warm and gentle, and Tabitha felt like her entire body was singing. She had been kissed before, awkward fumbling from boys back in Denver who did not mean anything. This was different. This felt like a promise, like the beginning of forever. "I do not want to leave tomorrow," Ryder admitted when they finally pulled apart, both breathless. "But I have to. My supplies will only stretch so far, and I need to check my trap lines." "I know," Tabitha said, even though her heart ached at the thought of him leaving. "But you will come back in a week?" "Nothing could keep me away." He kept his word. Through November and December, Ryder made the 8-mile trek down the mountain every week. Sometimes he could only stay a day. Other times, when the weather cooperated, he lingered for 3 or 4. Each visit deepened their connection, building the foundation of something real and lasting. Tabitha learned that Ryder was patient and thoughtful, quick to laugh but slow to anger. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her giggle like a schoolgirl. He was generous, often bringing gifts when he visited. Not expensive things, but handmade items that showed he thought about her when they were apart. A carved wooden spoon for her kitchen work. A warm rabbit fur hat that kept her ears cozy during her walks. A small leather journal with blank pages for her to record her thoughts. Ryder learned that Tabitha was determined and resourceful, sensitive but not fragile. She had a quick mind and loved learning new things. She read voraciously, borrowing books from anyone in town willing to lend them. She had strong opinions about politics and was not afraid to voice them, even when they disagreed with his. She could be stubborn, but she was always willing to listen to reason. And she had the most beautiful laugh he had ever heard, bright and uninhibited. Georgetown's residents watched the courtship with interest. Some approved, charmed by the unlikely romance between the gruff mountain man and the boarding house cook. Others were skeptical, predicting it would end in heartbreak. Mrs. Whitmore proved to be firmly in the former camp, encouraging Tabitha at every turn and always making sure Ryder was well fed when he visited. Christmas came, and Ryder spent 3 full days in town. He attended the church service with Tabitha on Christmas Eve, looking decidedly uncomfortable in the crowded building, but enduring it for her sake. On Christmas morning, he gave her a gift that made her cry. It was a beautifully crafted wooden box, small enough to fit in her palm, with her initials carved into the lid. "For your treasures," he explained. "Everyone needs a place to keep the things that matter." Inside the box was a ring, simple, made of silver, with a small blue stone set in the center. It was my mother's," Ryder said quietly. "The only thing I have from her. My pa gave it to me before he died, said I should give it to the woman I wanted to marry. I know we agreed to wait until spring, but I wanted you to have it now. To know I am serious about this, about us." Tabitha threw her arms around his neck, the box clutched tightly in her hand. "I am serious too. I love you, Ryder Dalton. I think I have loved you since the day you ate my burned bread without complaint." "I love you too," he said, the words sounding like they had been torn from somewhere deep inside him. "More than I thought I could love anyone." They announced their engagement on New Year's Day, 1877. The wedding was planned for April, when the mountain passes would be clear and the weather mild enough for a celebration. January and February passed in a blur of preparations. Tabitha continued working at the boarding house, but now she was also sewing her wedding dress, planning the menu for their small reception, daydreaming about her future life with Ryder. Mrs. Whitmore helped with all of it, seeming to take genuine pleasure in Tabitha's happiness. Ryder's weekly visits continued, though now they spent much of their time making practical plans. Where would they live? Ryder's cabin was too far from town for Tabitha to continue working at the boarding house, at least at first. They decided she would finish out her commitment to Mrs. Whitmore through the end of April, and then they would spend the summer at Ryder's cabin. When winter came again, they would evaluate whether Tabitha wanted to stay on the mountain year-round, or if they should purchase a small house in town where they could live during the harshest months. "I want you to be happy," Ryder insisted. "I do not want you to feel trapped or isolated. If mountain life does not suit you, we will find another way." "I think it will suit me," Tabitha said, "but I appreciate you being willing to compromise. That means everything." March arrived with the promise of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Early wildflowers pushed up through the last patches of frost. The days grew longer, and the air warmed. Georgetown came alive with energy as residents emerged from their winter hibernation. Tabitha's cooking had improved dramatically over the winter months. She no longer feared the oven or second-guessed every recipe. Mrs. Whitmore had even begun to trust her with special orders from customers. The boarding house had a reputation now for good, hearty food, and Tabitha knew she had contributed to that. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ryder came down the mountain with news. "I sold some land," he told Tabitha as they walked through town together. "A parcel I inherited from my pa that I have never used. Got a good price for it. Enough that I want to buy you something." "You do not need to buy me anything," Tabitha protested. "I do not need material things." "I know," Ryder said, "but I want to anyway. There's a house for sale on the edge of town. Small place, just 3 rooms, but it is well built and the roof does not leak. I thought we could purchase it as our winter residence. That way you would not have to spend months at a time completely cut off from town if you did not want to. We could keep the cabin for summer and autumn when the mountains are at their best, and come down here when the snows get too deep." Tabitha stopped walking, staring at him in shock. "Ryder, that is too much. A whole house?" "It is an investment in our future," he said, "in your happiness and comfort. Will you at least look at it before you say no?" She could not refuse such a reasonable request. They walked to the edge of town where a small log house sat nestled against the hillside. It was modest but charming, with a covered porch and glass windows. Inside, the rooms were empty but clean. There was a kitchen with a good stove, a main living area with a stone fireplace, and a small bedroom just big enough for a bed and wardrobe. "We could add on," Ryder said, watching her explore. "Build another room or 2 as we need them, when children come." When, not if. The certainty in his voice made Tabitha's heart swell. "You want children?" "Of course," he said, looking surprised that she would even question it. "Do not you?" "Yes," Tabitha said. "I do. I just did not know if you had thought about it." "I have thought about everything," Ryder admitted. "Every detail of our life together. I've imagined it all, teaching our children to track and hunt, watching you cook in our kitchen, growing old together. I want all of it, Tabitha, every moment." Tabitha crossed the empty room and took his hands in hers. "Then let us buy the house and fill it with all those moments you have imagined." The house was purchased with money left over after the down payment. They spent the next 2 weeks furnishing it with help from Mrs. Whitmore and other friends in town. A bed frame and mattress, a table and chairs, curtains for the windows, dishes for the kitchen. Simple things, but each one felt significant. Each one was a piece of the life they were building together. The wedding took place on a Saturday in mid-April. The ceremony was held at the small church in Georgetown, with nearly the entire town in attendance. Tabitha wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried a bouquet of early spring flowers. Her hair was pinned up with the combs Mrs. Whitmore had given her as a wedding gift. Ryder stood at the altar looking uncomfortable in formal clothes, but devastatingly handsome nonetheless. He had trimmed his beard and hair for the occasion, and his gray eyes never left Tabitha as she walked down the aisle. His expression held such love, such devotion, that Tabitha felt tears prick at her eyes. The preacher kept the service short, knowing his audience. When it came time for the vows, Ryder's voice was strong and clear. I promise to love you in all seasons, through all hardships, for all the days of my life. I promise to provide for you, protect you, and cherish you. I promise to be the man you deserve every single day." Tabitha's voice shook slightly as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to stand beside you, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you that honors both of us. I promise to love you fiercely and faithfully. I promise to be your partner in all things, now and forever." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed her with such enthusiasm that the congregation erupted in laughter and applause. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Whitmore insisting on handling all the food. There was roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetable stew, and pies in 3 different flavors. People ate and drank and danced to music provided by a local man with a fiddle. Tabitha danced with Ryder, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he guided her through the steps. She danced with other townsmen who wanted to congratulate her. She laughed until her face hurt and felt happier than she had ever been in her entire life. As the sun began to set, Ryder pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Dalton?" Mrs. Dalton. Her new name. It sounded perfect. "Yes," she said. "Let us go home." They walked to their small house on the edge of town, hand in hand. Inside, Ryder built up the fire while Tabitha lit candles. The rooms glowed warm and welcoming in the gathering darkness. Ryder came to her then, pulling her into his arms. "I need to tell you something," he said softly. "What is it?" "That day you burned the bread," he began. "I did not just happen to hear about it. I had come to town specifically to see you. I'd been thinking about you since the first time I saw you in Fletcher's store, before we even spoke. You were examining those ribbons, and the way the light hit your hair. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I told myself I was being foolish, that I had no business pursuing a town girl who probably wanted nothing to do with a rough mountain man. But then I heard about the burned bread, and the way those men had mocked you, and I could not stand it. I had to do something, so I ate that bread, every piece, because I wanted to show you that someone saw value in you, even when you thought you had failed." Tabitha felt tears stream down her face. "Ryder, I fell in love with you that morning," he continued, "the moment I saw you standing in that kitchen, looking so heartbroken, and every day since then, I have fallen deeper. I am the luckiest man alive because you chose me back." "I did not choose you," Tabitha said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "I fell for you. There was no choice involved. You captured my heart completely, and I never stood a chance." They came together then, husband and wife, in the home they would share. And as Ryder carried her to their bedroom, Tabitha thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a single moment of failure could lead to the greatest happiness, how burned bread had brought her the love of her life. The next morning, Tabitha woke wrapped in Ryder's arms, sunlight streaming through the window. She studied his face in sleep, memorizing every line and scar. He was hers now, completely and absolutely hers. His eyes opened slowly, and he smiled when he saw her watching him. "Morning, wife." "Morning, husband." They lay there for a long moment, simply enjoying each other's presence. Finally, Ryder said, "I should get up. There is work to do if we are going to move supplies up to the cabin before the month is out." "Later," Tabitha said, snuggling closer. "Right now, I just want this." So they stayed, wrapped up in each other in the quiet peace of their new beginning. Later, they would worry about cabins and supplies and all the practical concerns of life. For now, this was enough. True to their plan, they spent the rest of April preparing to move to Ryder's mountain cabin for the summer. Tabitha said goodbye to Mrs. Whitmore with promises to visit before the winter snows came. The older woman hugged her tightly, whispering that she was proud of the woman Tabitha had become. The journey to the cabin took most of a day. They rode horses loaded down with supplies, following narrow trails that climbed steadily upward. Tabitha had never been so far into the wilderness. The forests grew thick and wild around them. She saw deer and elk, a fox darting between trees, heard the cry of an eagle overhead. The air smelled of pine and earth and possibility. When they finally reached the cabin, Tabitha understood why Ryder loved it so much. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a mountain stream running nearby. The cabin itself was larger than she had expected, well built with a solid roof and real windows. Behind it was a small barn for the horses and storage. "What do you think?" Ryder asked, watching her anxiously. "It is perfect," Tabitha breathed. "Absolutely perfect." They spent the summer months settling into their new life together. Ryder taught Tabitha to identify edible plants, to fish in the stream, to recognize animal tracks. She proved to be an eager student, soaking up knowledge with the same determination she had applied to learning to cook. In turn, she brought her own skills to their partnership. She organized the cabin, making it more efficient and comfortable. She planted a small garden near the stream. She experimented with preserving foods for the coming winter. They fell into an easy rhythm. Ryder would check his trap lines while Tabitha managed the homestead. They would come together in the evenings, sharing meals and stories and plans for the future. At night, they would lie together in their bed, talking until sleep claimed them. It was during one of these quiet evening conversations in late June that Tabitha shared her suspicion. "I think I might be pregnant." Ryder sat up so quickly he nearly knocked over the candle on the bedside table. "Are you certain?" "Not completely," Tabitha admitted, "but I have missed my monthly courses and I have been feeling strange in the mornings. It is too early to know for sure, but I think so." Ryder's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his lap, holding her like she was made of glass. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Tabitha asked, though his expression left little doubt. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ryder said. "I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely stand it. You have given me everything, Tabitha, a home, a purpose, love, and now this. How did I get so lucky?" "We are both lucky," she corrected, kissing him softly. "We found each other when we both needed it most. That's a gift." As the summer progressed, it became clear that Tabitha was indeed pregnant. Ryder became even more protective than usual, insisting she rest more and do less heavy work. Tabitha tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding it came from a place of love. In August, they made a trip down to Georgetown to see the doctor and purchase supplies. Dr. Morrison confirmed the pregnancy and estimated the baby would arrive in late February or early March. He gave Tabitha instructions for staying healthy and told Ryder to stop looking like he was going to faint. "Your wife is strong and healthy," the doctor said. "She will be fine. Babies are born every day, Mr. Dalton. Try to relax." Easier said than done. Ryder worried constantly. Was the cabin too isolated? What if something went wrong during the birth? Should they plan to be in town for the delivery? Tabitha finally put her foot down. "We will come down to Georgetown in February," she said firmly. "We will stay at our house in town until after the baby is born and I have recovered. Then we will go back to the cabin in the spring. Does that plan work for you?" Ryder relaxed visibly. "Yes, that works, thank you." They spent September and October preparing. Ryder hunted and preserved meat, ensuring they would have plenty for the winter. Tabitha sewed baby clothes, tiny gowns, and blankets. They added a cradle to their bedroom, crafted by Ryder's own hands from smooth pine. Every evening he would speak to Tabitha's growing belly, telling their unborn child stories about the mountains and promising to teach them everything he knew. In early November, they made the move back to their Georgetown house. The snows would come soon, making the mountain pass impassable. Tabitha was 5 months along now, her belly round and obvious under her dresses. She moved more slowly, but insisted she felt well. The winter passed peacefully. Tabitha reconnected with Mrs. Whitmore and other friends in town. Ryder found work helping to repair buildings and chop wood for residents, earning extra money to pad their savings. They spent their evenings in their cozy house, reading aloud to each other, planning for their growing family, dreaming about the future. Tabitha craved bread, of all things, good bread, fresh bread, bread with butter and jam. Ryder would laugh and say she was making up for that first burned batch. She would throw a pillow at him, and he would catch it easily and pull her in for a kiss. February arrived with bitter cold and heavy snows. Tabitha was huge now, uncomfortable and ready for the baby to arrive. Dr. Morrison checked on her regularly and pronounced everything normal. Mrs. Whitmore promised to be there for the birth, bringing her years of experience helping women through delivery. On a snowy morning in late February, Tabitha woke Ryder before dawn with a hand on his shoulder and quiet words. "It is time." The baby is coming. Ryder was out of bed instantly, moving with barely controlled panic. He built up the fire, boiled water, ran to fetch Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Whitmore. By the time they arrived, Tabitha was in active labor, breathing through contractions with gritted teeth. "You're doing fine," Mrs. Whitmore said, holding Tabitha's hand. "Just fine. This is all normal." The labor lasted through the morning and into early afternoon. Ryder stayed by Tabitha's side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to bruise, murmuring encouragement, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. He looked nearly as exhausted as she felt. "I see the head," Dr. Morrison announced. "One more push, Mrs. Dalton. You are almost there." Tabitha gathered what little strength she had left and pushed. The baby slid free with a rush, and a moment later, a strong, angry cry filled the room. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison said, holding up the squirming infant. "A big, healthy boy." Tabitha collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Ryder was crying too, she realized, silent tears tracking through his beard as he stared at their son in wonder. Mrs. Whitmore cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Tabitha's arms. He was perfect, tiny and red and screaming, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn gray like his father's. "Hello, little one," Tabitha whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Ryder reached out with one finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. Their son immediately gripped it, his little fingers wrapping around Ryder's much larger one. "He's so small," Ryder said, awed. "How is he this small?" "He will grow," Tabitha said, smiling through her tears. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one definitively. Now, looking at their son, Ryder said, "James, after your father." Tabitha's breath caught. "Really? Really? James Preston Dalton. He should have a piece of your family too." "James," Tabitha repeated, testing it out. "James Dalton. I love it. Thank you." Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Whitmore cleaned up and gave final instructions before leaving the new family alone. Ryder climbed into bed beside Tabitha, carefully arranging himself so she could lean against him while cradling their son. "We made him," Ryder said, still sounding amazed. "We made a person." "We did," Tabitha agreed. She was exhausted but happier than she could ever remember being. "And we are going to raise him right, teach him to be strong and kind, like his father. And smart and determined, like his mother," Ryder added. He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Tabitha Dalton. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." "I love you too, so much." James fussed, rooting around, and Tabitha helped him latch on to nurse. Ryder watched with fascination and tenderness, his large hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "I'm never going to get used to how amazing you are," he said quietly. Tabitha laughed softly. "You better, because you are stuck with me now, for the rest of our lives." "Best deal I ever made," Ryder said. The weeks after James's birth were challenging but wonderful. Tabitha recovered slowly, and Ryder took over all the household tasks without complaint. He proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with their tiny son. Tabitha would wake in the night to find Ryder walking the floor with James, humming tunelessly, soothing him back to sleep. Mrs. Whitmore visited frequently, bringing food and advice and offering to watch James so Tabitha could rest. The older woman had become like a mother to Tabitha, and now she took on the role of doting grandmother with enthusiasm. In April, when James was 6 weeks old and the mountain passes were clear, they made the journey back to the cabin. It was slower going with an infant, but they took their time. James seemed to thrive in the mountain air, and Tabitha felt a deep contentment settle over her as they reached their summer home. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, learning to walk in the forest, to recognize bird calls, to be gentle with animals. When he was 2, Tabitha became pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter named Rose, arrived in December during a light snowfall in Georgetown. She had Tabitha's auburn hair and Ryder's gray eyes, and she was fierce from the moment she was born, screaming with indignation at being forced into the cold world. "She is going to keep us on our toes," Ryder predicted, and he was right. By the time James was 5 and Rose was 3, they had firmly established their pattern of life. Summers and autumns at the mountain cabin, where Ryder continued his trapping, and Tabitha managed an impressive garden and preserved enough food to see them through the lean months. Winters and early springs in Georgetown, where the children could attend school and socialize with other families, and where Tabitha could maintain her friendships. It was a good life. Not always easy, but good. There were hard winters when supplies ran low and everyone was restless from being cooped up indoors. There were summer storms that flooded the stream and ruined crops. There were illnesses and injuries and the normal struggles of raising children. But there was also so much joy. James's first successful fishing trip, his pride beaming from every pore as he showed off his catch. Rose learning to ride a horse at 4, fearless and laughing. Family dinners around their table, everyone talking over each other in their rush to share the day's adventures. Quiet nights when the children were finally asleep, and Ryder and Tabitha could sit together on their porch, watching the stars and marveling at the life they had built. When James was 7 and Rose was 5, Tabitha found herself pregnant again. This time, the baby arrived in June at the mountain cabin. It was a quick labor, and Ryder ended up delivering the child himself with Mrs. Whitmore, talking him through it via instructions they had gotten before they left town. The baby was another boy, smaller than his siblings had been, but healthy. They named him Thomas, and he completed their family perfectly. Mrs. Whitmore passed away peacefully in her sleep when Thomas was 2 years old. Tabitha grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when she needed it most, who had taught her to cook and believe in herself, who had become the mother she had lost. At the funeral, Tabitha spoke about how Mrs. Whitmore's kindness had changed her life, how one person's willingness to see potential in a struggling young woman had made all the difference. "She taught me that failure is not the end," Tabitha said, "that burning the bread is just a lesson, not a catastrophe, that with patience and practice we can all improve. I carry her wisdom with me every day, and I will pass it on to my children. Mrs. Whitmore's legacy lives on in all the people she helped and believed in." After the funeral, Ryder held Tabitha as she cried, and their children huddled close, instinctively understanding that their mother needed comfort. "She would be so proud of you," Ryder said quietly, "of the woman you have become, the mother you are, everything you have accomplished." "I hope so," Tabitha whispered. "I hope she knew how much she meant to me." She knew. Life continued. The children grew. James became a skilled hunter and tracker, following in his father's footsteps. Rose developed a passion for cooking, spending hours in the kitchen with Tabitha, learning recipes and experimenting with new dishes. Thomas showed an aptitude for woodworking, carving small figures and useful items with surprising skill for someone so young. Tabitha's cooking skills had long since surpassed adequate and entered the realm of truly excellent. She could make bread that was golden and perfect, roasts that were tender and flavorful, pies that people raved about. But sometimes, on quiet mornings when she was alone in the kitchen, she would deliberately leave a loaf in the oven a little too long, just until the edges charred, just until it looked like that first disastrous batch so many years ago. And she would smile, remembering the mountain man who had eaten every burnt piece and asked for more, never knowing that his simple act of kindness would lead to this entire, beautiful life. One evening when Tabitha was 35 and Ryder was 49, they sat on the porch of their Georgetown house watching their children play in the snow. James was 15 now, nearly as tall as his father and just as broad. Rose was 13, all sharp wit and boundless energy. Thomas was 10, thoughtful and creative. They were building a snow fort, their laughter carrying clearly in the cold air. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked suddenly. "Marrying me? Living this life? You could have stayed in town, found a different path, something easier." Tabitha looked at him in surprise. "Regret?" "Ryder, no. Never. Not for a single moment. This life, this family, you are everything I ever wanted, everything I did not even know I could want until I found it. Even though it has been hard sometimes." "Especially because it has been hard sometimes," Tabitha said. "The hard parts taught me I'm stronger than I thought. They taught our children resilience and perseverance. Easy does not always mean better." Ryder pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. His beard was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around his eyes, but he was still her strong, protective mountain man, still the person who made her feel safest and most loved. "I love you," he said, "more now than ever." "I love you too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, both thinking about the strange path that had brought them to this moment. from burned bread to a lifetime of happiness, from strangers to partners to parents, from loneliness to love. The years continued to pass. James married at 20, bringing home a sensible young woman from a neighboring town who fit into the family immediately. They built a small cabin near Ryder's original homestead, choosing to make their life in the mountains year-round. 2 years later, they made Tabitha and Ryder grandparents with the arrival of a baby girl. Rose showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on her cooking. When she was 20, she purchased the boarding house in Georgetown when the new owners decided to sell. She expanded it, adding more rooms and building a reputation that drew people from across Colorado. Best food in the Rockies, the advertisements claimed, and it was not an exaggeration. Thomas apprenticed with a master carpenter in Denver for several years before returning to Georgetown. He opened his own workshop, creating beautiful furniture and custom pieces. He married at 25, and his wife was an artist who painted mountain landscapes. They had 3 children in quick succession, all of them inheriting their parents' creative talents. Tabitha and Ryder watched their children build their own lives with pride and satisfaction. They split their time between the mountain cabin, which James and his family now helped maintain, and their Georgetown house, which had been expanded over the years to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren. Ryder was 60 when his health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down of a body that had lived a hard life in harsh conditions. His joints ached more. He moved slower. He tired more easily. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Tabitha never wavered. Tabitha was 46, still strong and capable, and she became his caretaker without complaint. She made sure he took the medicine the doctor prescribed. She adjusted their activities to match his energy levels. She refused to treat him like an invalid, knowing his pride would not tolerate that, but she was always there when he needed support. On a spring evening when Ryder was 62 and Tabitha was 48, they sat on the porch of their mountain cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was just the two of them now, a rare moment of solitude. "Do you remember that first morning?" Tabitha asked. "When I burned the bread?" Ryder chuckled, the sound as warm and comforting as it had been 30 years ago. "How could I forget? You stood there looking so heartbroken over some bread. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in flour and fighting back tears." "I thought you were crazy," Tabitha admitted. "Who eats burned bread on purpose?" "Someone who saw an opportunity," Ryder said. "Someone who wanted an excuse to talk to a pretty woman. Someone who knew even then that you were going to change my life." Tabitha reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing automatically. "You changed mine. Saved me, really. I was so lost after my father died, so unsure of who I was or where I belonged. You showed me that I could be strong, that I could build a life worth living." "We built it together," Ryder corrected. "Every step, every decision, we did it as partners." "Yes," Tabitha agreed. "Together." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the mountains. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, one by one, until the heavens sparkled with light. "I want you to promise me something," Ryder said eventually. "Anything." "When I'm gone," Tabitha started to protest, but he squeezed her hand gently. "Listen, when I'm gone, I want you to keep living, really living, not just existing. Keep cooking, keep spending time with the children and grandchildren. Keep finding joy in the small things. Promise me." Tears slipped down Tabitha's cheeks, but she nodded. "I promise, if you promise me something too." "What is it?" "Promise me that you will not give up, that you will keep fighting to stay with me for as long as you can. I'm not ready to say goodbye. I do not think I will ever be ready." "I promise," Ryder said. "I will fight. For you, for our family, for every moment we can have together." He kept his promise. Ryder lived another 8 years, making it to his 70th birthday. He held his first great-grandchild. He danced with Tabitha at Thomas's youngest daughter's wedding. He taught James's son to track a deer through the forest. He saw Rose's boarding house expand again, becoming one of the most successful establishments in Georgetown. He died peacefully on a summer night at the mountain cabin, with Tabitha beside him and all their children gathered around. His last words were, "Love you, Tabby. Always have, always will." Tabitha held his hand until it grew cold, then she bent and kissed his forehead one last time. "Always," she whispered back. The grief was enormous, threatening to swallow her whole. But Tabitha remembered her promise. She kept living. She continued splitting her time between the cabin and the Georgetown house. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, passing on stories about Ryder and the life they had built. She taught her granddaughters to cook, making sure they understood that mistakes were lessons, not failures. And once a week, every week for the rest of her life, Tabitha baked bread. Sometimes it turned out perfect, golden and delicious. Sometimes she let it burn a little, charring the edges, remembering the morning that had changed everything. She lived to be 86 years old, sharp-minded and stubborn until the very end. She died surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in the Georgetown house she and Ryder had purchased over 60 years earlier. Her last words were about Ryder, telling her gathered family that she would see him soon, that she was ready to be with him again. At her funeral, Rose stood before the crowded church and told the story of the burned bread. How her mother had been so devastated by such a small mistake. How a mountain man had walked into the boarding house and eaten every burnt piece without complaint. How that simple act of kindness had sparked a love story that lasted a lifetime and created a family that now numbered in the dozens. "My mother taught us that failure is not the end," Rose said, echoing the words Tabitha had spoken at Mrs. Whitmore's funeral so many years before. That sometimes our worst moments lead to our best blessings, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness matters, even in small gestures. She and my father built something beautiful together, and their legacy lives on in all of us. In the front pew, James held his aging wife's hand and remembered being a small boy, watching his parents work together, learning from their example what a good marriage looked like. Thomas sat with his children and grandchildren, thinking about the wooden box his father had carved for his mother so many decades ago, which now held her treasures and had been passed to him for safekeeping. And in every pew, in every row, sat descendants of Ryder and Tabitha Dalton, living proof of what could grow from burned bread and unexpected kindness. The story of the burned bread became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Some details changed over the years, grew embellished or simplified, but the heart of it remained true. A woman who made a mistake, a man who saw past it, a love that blossomed against all odds, a life built on partnership, perseverance, and the understanding that perfection is not required for happiness. In Georgetown, Colorado, the boarding house that Rose had built into an empire eventually became a hotel, run by her great-great-granddaughter. In the lobby hung an old photograph of Ryder and Tabitha from their later years, sitting on the porch of their mountain cabin. Below it, a brass plaque told their story in brief, ending with the words, "From burnt bread to forever love." May we all be so lucky to find someone who sees our worth in our worst moments. The mountain cabin stood for over 100 years before finally succumbing to time and weather. But the spot remained a family gathering place, where descendants of Ryder and Tabitha would camp during summers, telling stories around the fire, teaching their children to fish in the stream, keeping the legacy alive. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right through the pine trees, you could almost hear it. A deep voice laughing, a woman's bright reply. The sound of a love that had transcended time, left its mark on the world, and proven that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most imperfect beginnings. The bread might have burned that September morning in 1876, but it sparked a flame that would burn bright for generations. And that, in the end, was the real miracle. Not that a mountain man ate burnt bread, but that he saw the woman behind the mistake and loved her for exactly who she was. Not that a woman found herself failing at a new job, but that she had the courage to accept help, to open her heart, to build a life beyond anything she had imagined. Ryder and Tabitha Dalton had lived, loved, struggled, and triumphed. They had raised children who raised children who raised children. They had created something lasting from a moment of crisis. And their story, like all the best love stories, proved that sometimes fate works in mysterious ways. Sometimes the right person walks into your life exactly when you need them most. Sometimes burned bread is the beginning of everything. Their love had been wild like the West they lived in, tender like fresh bread from the oven, enduring like the mountains that surrounded their home. It had been real and messy and imperfect and absolutely, completely, beautifully worth it. And if you had asked either of them in any moment of their long lives together whether they would change anything about how they met, they would have said no, not a single thing. Because every moment, good and bad, perfect and flawed, had led them to each other, had created their story, had made them who they were. The bread burned that day, but from those ashes rose a love that would last forever, a family that would span generations, and a reminder that sometimes our worst moments contain the seeds of our greatest blessings. We just have to be brave enough to let someone see us in our failure, and lucky enough to find someone who stays anyway. That was the gift Ryder gave Tabitha that first morning. And it was the gift they gave each other day after day, year after year, for the rest of their lives. The gift of being seen, being accepted, being loved completely. The gift of partnership and perseverance. The gift of building something beautiful together, one imperfect moment at a time. And in the end, that was all any of them could hope for, to love and be loved, to fail and be forgiven, to make mistakes and be given grace, to burn the bread and have someone eat it anyway, seeing past the char to the heart that baked it. That was Ryder and Tabitha's story. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world. A love born from burned bread, nurtured in the Wild West, and lasting for all time.